Hey there, wicked listeners, and welcome to episode 8. As always, I'm your host, Jan Ruet. Before we jump in, there is some admin that needs to be done again. If you're not following me on social media, I want to highly recommend that you do so soon. I'm reviving the podcast social media with a bit of help, which means that you will get a lot more updates and a few surprises. We're mainly focusing on Facebook for now, and we have a Facebook group and a page for the podcast up, running, and active. I would suggest joining both the group and following the page for one simple reason. The group is there to build a community where you and I and all the other listeners can engage in active conversation and discussion about the cases I cover, and other cases that might be of interest to us. The page is used to share important announcements and information regarding the podcast itself. Both can be found under the name Wicked Crimes, and you just need to switch your search bar between page and group to make sure you find the one which you need. I'll also add a link to both in the show notes of the episode, just to help make it easier. And that's it. That's all the admin for this week. So let's jump straight into this week's episode, The Serial Crimes of Jason Alan Thornburg.
Please be advised that this podcast contains content that could be harmful to some listeners. This includes, but is not limited to, strong language and graphic descriptions of violence, sexual activities, assault, and death. This podcast also engages in discussion regarding various religions, spiritual beliefs, and practices, some of which might be harmful or triggering for some listeners. Please reconsider before consuming this content. The information contained within this podcast is mainly gathered from news articles and official court documents where available. Should you have any more information, or if you know of any incorrect information in this content, please feel free to contact the host through the email found in the show notes.
The case we're covering today is actually made up of 3 different cases, 2 of which are still active. While I normally do not cover active investigations, the 2 active cases in this one have elements to them that allow me to cover them without causing damage to ongoing proceedings. In fact, at least one of these cases urgently needs public attention. Tanya Begay was a 36-year-old mother of 2. In 2016, she and her children moved from Phoenix, Arizona in the US to her relative's home in Gallup, New Mexico, also in the US. Here she met the neighbor from across the street, a man named Jason Thornburg. Tanya and Jason headed off quite quickly, and within a few days the two were dating. Tanya's family had met Jason, and while he initially seemed to be a nice enough man, his dark nature would soon show itself. As quickly as the relationship between the two had started, Jason's abuse of Tanya also started. Her family was not impressed and regularly asked Tanya to get away from Thornburg. Unfortunately, as is common in abusive relationships, Tanya seemed to remain under Thornburg's power and would not leave him that easily. In late February of 2017, it seemed as if things might change. Tanya contacted a close friend and spoke to her about looking for a place to stay as a way to get away from Thornburg. Tanya's friend noted that Tanya had sounded a bit odd. She was not her normal bubbly self. Before the 2 women could make any concrete plans for Tanya to get away, however, police was called out to Tanya's residence on a domestic disturbance call. When Tanya answered the door, her face was full of blood and glass was still stuck in her face around her left eye. she told officers that Thornburg had used an empty coffee pot to assault her. The laws regarding domestic violence in the US require an arrest in this case, and that the state, not the victim, press charges against the aggressor. The reason for this is actually quite simple, and Tanya Begay is a shining example of why this legal procedure exists. An abusive partner's abuse is usually not limited to physical abuse. There are usually elements of mental, emotional, and financial abuse as well, even if these are not the main forms of abuse. This occurs because the abuser uses it to make the victim believe that the abuse is their fault and not that of the abuser. In doing this, it allows them to manipulate or intimidate the victim of abuse into not only remaining in the relationship and allowing the abuse to continue, but also to prevent the victim from taking legal action against the abuser. This is the reason why so many victims of abuse later retract the charges or refuse to prosecute, because they either believe that the abuse was due to their actions and that they are wrong to make the abuser pay for it, or they are so scared of retaliation from the abuser that they give in to their demands. When the state is the one to press charges, the victim has no way of withdrawing the case themselves, and the idea is that this allows abusers to be prosecuted more successfully. Thornburg was questioned, arrested, and then charged with a domestic violence case, which was due to begin in March of 2017. In the days after the domestic incident, Thornburg, however, had managed to pull Tanya back into his clutches. As soon as Tanya was under his control again, the pair set off on a road trip. They hitchhiked the 25-mile journey from Gallup to Tohatchi, where they visited Tanya's family. Here, they allegedly asked Tanya's father for money before stealing her aunt's car on the 2nd of March 2017. The following day, Tanya phoned her mother and told her that they were on their way back to Gallup from Tohatchi. Tanya never arrived back in Gallup, and her family has not heard from her since. By the 19th of March 2017, Tanya's mother had still not heard a word from her daughter, and finally reported her as missing. By the 21st of March, police managed to track down Thornburg and questioned him about Tanya's disappearance. However, they were unable to get any information with him, and with a lack of evidence that he did anything wrong, they had to let Thornburg go. When Tanya also did not show up for court in the domestic violence trial against Thornburg, the charges against him were dropped. Let's take a moment here. There's something that does not make sense to me. The law requires the state to charge an abuser with the express purpose of not letting the abuser use their influence over the victim to avoid charges. But when the victim suddenly disappears under suspicious circumstances while in the company of the accused abuser, the state drops the charges. The idea behind this is to protect victims from intimidation and manipulation by their alleged abuser. But if the charges will get dropped in any case if the victim does not show up, it seems to me as if that would put victims at even greater risk of losing their lives. The only thing an abuser needs to do now to ensure that they face no consequences is to ensure their victim can never testify against them. There is also another explanation for why this case was so easily dropped. Tanya Begay was from the Navajo Nation. Tanya's case is not only a perfect example of what occurs in domestic abuse cases, but also how Native Americans are treated under the U.S. justice system. Since her disappearance, Tanya's family and friends and other Native American activists have spoken out about the apparent lack of interest in cases involving Native American victims. Tanya's case remains open at the time of this episode's release. Okay, before we continue with the case, let's jump back a bit and learn more about our perpetrator, Jason Thornburg. Thornburg is also a Native American and grew up in a Navajo reservation. While pregnant with him, his mother suffered from addiction and regularly abused substances. This would apparently continue even after his birth, causing him to have a rather poor upbringing. The first records I found of criminal activity from Thornburg was when he was around the age of 34 in 2014. In May of 2014, he carjacked a woman and was later arrested and convicted for this. Thornburg only spent 9 months in prison for this before being released and eventually paroled in 2016. Sometime in 2014, Thornburg had also been arrested of a charge of drug possession. However, I could not find much information on this charge. This means that around the time that Thornburg had met Tanya Begay, he was already on parole for one serious crime. By the time of her disappearance, he had also faced domestic violence charges, but was questioned only once before he was let go. Not long after that, Thornburg would disappear from the area. The next time we hear from him is in June of 2018, when he is charged with evading arrest with a vehicle in Wise County, Texas, around 700 miles from Gallup, New Mexico. While there is no details regarding what Thornburg was initially supposed to be arrested for him in order to evade arrest, Thornburg was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for this evasion charge. In May of 2019, Thornburg was released on mandatory supervision, and in June of 2020, he was discharged from parole. In other words, in the 3 years since Tanya Begay's disappearance, it only took Thornburg a year to be arrested on other charges, and the state kept an eye on him for the 2 years following that. At the time of his parole, Thornburg had been living in a transitional center in Fort Worth. While living in this center, Thornburg appeared to be a model resident, always busy reading his Bible, preaching to his roommates, and not showing any violent tendencies at all. It's also at this center that Thornburg met a 60-year-old man named Mark Jewell. The two seemed to share the same faith-based views, and by August of 2020, 2 months after being released from his parole, Thornburg moved in with Jewell, who opened his house to Thornburg out of a sense of Christian charity. In fact, Mark Jewell was well known by his neighbors as a kind-hearted soul who would help wherever he can. When in early 2021 a new neighbor moved in, who also happened to be pregnant, Jewell wasted no time in helping her out with simple things like taking her trash can in for her after it has been emptied, and inviting her and her boyfriend to an Easter service at his church. That same neighbor would also meet Thornburg. She had started to suspect a gas leak in her home and called the gas company to investigate. While they were investigating, Thornburg made his way over and quickly started to make her feel uncomfortable with the way he tried hanging around representatives from the gas company. He also started offering the neighbor his own assistance in her house, and when she declined that, he offered that she and her young child could spend the night at his and Jules' home if the gas company was unable to sort the leak out that same day. Thornburg eventually became so insistent on it that the neighbor quickly felt uncomfortable and told him that it would not be necessary, that her boyfriend would be there soon and he would assist her. Upon hearing this, Thornburg quickly became irritated with the woman and responded by letting out a sarcastic laugh and saying, "That's cute. I like how you just threw that in there that you had a boyfriend." When the woman attempted to explain that she just meant that she has assistance coming, Thornburg made his irritation even more clear and just walked away. After the incident, the neighbor noticed that Thornburg would often leave his front door open and stare at her whenever she would be unloading groceries from the car or taking her trash out. When he was not staring at her, he was still extremely visible sitting just inside the house at a table under his television, either busy studying his Bible or talking to himself as if he's preaching to the sermon that would be playing on the television. On the 21st of May 2001, mere minutes after Thornburg left for work that morning, the house he and Jules shared suddenly exploded, with Mark Jewell still inside the home. Mark did not survive the explosion. His body was discovered by firefighters after the flames were extinguished, too badly burned to determine a cause of death. Mark Jewell's death was classified as a suspicious death, and while Thornburg was a suspect, there was not much investigators could do due to a lack of evidence. Thornburg spoke at Jules' funeral and told attendees how they were good friends and would often study the Bible together. The attendees felt great sympathy for Thornburg, as he had not only lost a friend in the explosion, but also his home and all of his belongings. One of these attendees was a local life coach who felt so sorry for Thornburg that he often gave him food and even allowed him to join some of his leadership seminars. Thornburg in turn invited this life coach to join him in preaching on street corners. Thornburg would often be found on the corner with a microphone, preaching to passerbys and handing out religious flyers. When the life coach spoke to his wife and told her that he wanted to offer Thornburg a place to stay with him and his family for a while until he can get back on his feet, the wife quickly told him that she would not be comfortable with Thornburg in their home, and the offer was never extended. By the end of July 2021, Thornburg had moved into a local motel. This specific motel seemed to have quite a few semi-permanent residents. Thornburg quickly became known to most of them, as he would often be seen on the corner preaching, handing out his flyers, and inviting people back to his motel room to hear more of God's Word. Around the 15th of September 2021, a man named David Lueras arrived at the motel and immediately started living with Thornburg. David had been estranged from his family for quite a while. He had at some point fallen in with the wrong crowd and quickly racked up a criminal history that included burglary, drug possession, fraud, and theft. When David arrived in Fort Worth, he started reconnecting with family members in the area and told some of them that he was hiding out there from someone who meant him harm. By the 17th of September, Thornburg had slit David's throat in their room before placing him in the bathtub where he completely dismembered David. He then ate a piece of David's heart before placing the rest of his body parts in storage bags and hiding them beneath his bed. A couple of days later, Thornburg managed to lure a woman by the name of Mary Cruz Matters to his room. It is believed that he used his preaching and religious flyers to lure her back to the room. Once inside, he quickly slit her throat as well, before dismembering her and adding her body parts to the collection under his bed. Mary Cruz Matters had also been a resident of a motel. She had recently moved in after leaving her husband and starting her battle with addiction again. While Mary Cruz had seen her life fall apart, she still contacted her parents a few times a week. Mary Cruz has been described as a bubbly person who loved the church and her faith, and often became involved in youth programs despite facing her own demons. She was also the mother of a young boy. 2 days later, another woman by the name of Lauren Phillips also arrived at Thornburg's room. Lauren recently resumed her own battle with addiction after having been clean for several years in an attempt to give her 2 sons a happy and stable life. Unfortunately, after running into an old acquaintance, addiction took over again, and Lauren Phillips soon found herself homeless. I've seen some reports that Lauren and Thornburg had previously known each other, and that she sometimes used sexual favors as a way to obtain substances. These reports, however, are unconfirmed and denied by her loved ones. I share this because it seems as though Thornburg had lured her to the room with the intention of engaging in sexual activity. From the reports I found, it seems possible that Lauren had discovered the body parts of David Lueres and Mary Cruz Matters under Thornburg's bed. This led to Thornburg attempting to stab Lauren, but when this failed, he resorted to strangling her. Lauren's body was sexually assaulted after her death. She was also dismembered and added to the bags under the bed. At some point during the week that Thornburg had been murdering these 3 people, neighbors had started to notice a foul odor emanating from his room. A resident who lived directly above Thornburg and who had previously bonded with him over scriptures approached Thornburg regarding the smell. Thornburg attempted to explain away the smell by telling the neighbor he thinks someone may have urinated under the stairs directly adjacent to their 2 rooms. The neighbor, however, told Thornburg that the odor did not smell like urine to him. I believe this may have been the reason that on the evening of the 21st of September, Thornburg decided to dispose of the bodies. To do this, he purchased plastic storage containers. He then transferred the body parts into the storage containers and then placed the containers in his black Jeep Grand Cherokee. Thornburg traveled to a dumpster a fair distance from the motel and emptied the containers into the dumpster. In total, it took Thornburg 2 trips to move all the body parts from the motel to the dumpster. When he was finally finished, Thornburg set the dumpster on fire and returned to the motel. During the entire process of transferring the bodies, Thornburg had worn a full-body hazmat suit, similar to those worn when painting. Early in the morning of 22 September, emergency services responded to the dumpster fire. After extinguishing the flames, firefighters discovered the remains inside the dumpster. It would take 3 hours for crime scene technicians to remove all the body parts and confirm that there were 3 people in total. they also noticed that there were some body parts missing. Investigators quickly jumped into action and managed to find CCTV footage showing a black Jeep Grand Cherokee parked near the dumpsters, and a person dressed in a full-body hazmat suit emptying the storage bins into the dumpster before lighting it on fire. This allowed them to reduce their suspect list to about 7,000 Grand Cherokee owners in the area. During the investigation, David Lueras was identified first, thanks to a tattoo that covered his entire back with his surname. Initially, police thought the other two bodies belonged to a young woman and a child. Lauren Phillips was identified next, and Mary Cruz Matters was identified last. While following up on the lead regarding the car, investigators quickly noticed that Thornburg, who owns a Jeep that fits the description perfectly, was also a person of interest in the suspicious death of Mark Jewell. It did not take investigators long to track all three victims back to the same hotel where Thornburg was staying. When officers brought Thornburg in for questioning, he immediately confessed to the triple murder by telling officers that he had sacrificed all three of them. Investigators then asked Thornburg about Mark Jewell's death, at which time he also confessed to slitting Jewell's throat, before uncapping a gas line, lighting a candle, and then leaving for work. Also, as a sacrifice. Officers then asked Thornburg if there were any other sacrifices. Thornburg told them that he had sacrificed his girlfriend in 2017, none other than Tanya Begay. When officers asked him about the sacrifices, Thornburg told them that he had in-depth knowledge about the Bible, that he was being called to commit sacrifices, and that these sacrifices would allow him and his victims, whom were willing participants according to him, to enter the kingdom of heaven. On the 27th of September 2021, 4 days after lighting the dumpster on fire, Jason Thornburg was arrested for the murder of David Lueras, Lauren Phillips, and Mary Cruz Matters. That same year, Thornburg was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, as a judge found reasonable cause that Thornburg might be suffering from mental illness or an intellectual disability. He was found fit to stand trial. By February of 2022, Thornburg was also indicted on charges of murder and arson in regards to the murder of Mark Jewell. At the time of publishing this episode, I have no further information on that case. Thornburg's case for the September 2021 murders finally concluded in November of 2024 with a guilty verdict on the charge of capital murder. After a 5-hour deliberation, he was sentenced to death. During the trial, his defense team argued that he should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Their reasoning for this was that Thornburg had suffered from partial fetal alcohol syndrome due to his mother's substance abuse while being pregnant with him, but he had also faced many difficulties while growing up in the Navajo reservation, and that he suffered a moderately traumatic brain injury in 2002. The defense also explained that Thornburg had taken a New Testament verse literally, and that this was the reason why he believed he needed to murder and consume people in order to open a pathway to God's kingdom for himself and the victims. His defense also said that his belief that he was called to sacrifice people should form part of the proof that he is mentally unfit. I want to take a moment and look at this aspect of the case. Basically, what his defense argued is that if someone believes in their religion so much that they harm another, it is proof that they are mentally unfit and should therefore not be held responsible for their actions, but instead entered into a mental health facility until such time that they are no longer a danger to society. This is problematic for quite a few reasons. First of all, it reduces religious belief to a measurement of mental well-being. Does this then mean if I see someone preaching on the street corner, I can have them committed to a mental health facility for being too religious? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. If we had to agree that someone causing harm due to their religious convictions is mentally unwell, then we have a very big issue globally. Most people convicted on hate crimes, be it based on religious belief, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, or even disability, will then be able to claim that they are not mentally fit to stand trial or be found guilty. It also removes the question whether someone knew that their actions are wrong or not. So let's say, for example, someone murders an entire church congregation because that person's specific religion claims that Christianity is actually evil. Then they would not hold the capacity to be found criminally responsible for their actions. Do you see the issue here? Even if we just focus on him allegedly believing that these were sacrifices and not murder, does that excuse others who sacrifice people based on their religious views? The defense also argued that Thornburg had reduced executive functioning due to his brain injury and his mother's substance abuse. The prosecution argued that Thornburg was able to remain employed as an electrician's assistant for an extended period of time, and that he achieved a grade point average of 4.0 at a community college. This proved that his executive functioning was unaffected, as both of these would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for someone with a lack of executive functioning so severe to achieve. The prosecution also brought up the fact that Thornburg had committed 2 murders, which he had almost gotten away with if it wasn't for the fact that he had confessed to them. Finally, they used one of his own statements against him as well. Quote, "I couldn't use my chainsaw because that would be too loud, and I would get caught. I have to use my knife. I can't carry out the bodies like that. That would be too obvious. I need to get my car back. I need to go buy some bins and load them up in my car. I need to go dump these bodies in a dumpster 30 miles away to distance myself from the crime. I need to light the bodies on fire because I've done it twice before and I know that works. And I need to destroy the fingerprints." End quote. This statement made it clear that Thornburg had the mental capacity to not only plan the murders, but how to get away with them as well, using pretty sound logic. He clearly knew exactly what he was doing. During his trial, Thornburg also claimed that all the bodies were lit on fire as part of the ritual sacrifice. The prosecution, however, argued that it is quite clear that Thornburg had lit all the bodies on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Thornburg's defense attempted to also use the fact that he admitted to his actions as proof that he should not be held responsible, by blaming his belief that he had to sacrifice people on voices he alleged to be hearing. My issue with this is that Thornburg had been committing crimes since at least 2014. He had been incarcerated and lived in a communal center. He had been questioned by police several times, held gainful employment, engaged in social activities without issue, and showed the ability to plan his actions methodically and hide them from others without anyone at any point believing his actions were suspect or even violent. If he could hide the fact that he was hearing voices from authorities while in prison and on parole where he should have been regularly evaluated, then either he was not properly evaluated on whether he was a danger to society, or he was lying about the voices. While Thornburg has been sentenced to death, his story is far from over. By law, his sentence is automatically appealed, and he still needs to stand trial for the charges against him in regard to Mark Jules' murder. The average death row inmate waits about 11 years before they are executed. This means that the families of his last 4 victims will need to wait until around 2035 before they can see justice handed down. As for Tanya Begay's family, they have outright said that they will not have closure or a feeling of justice until her body has been found. Unfortunately, during his confession, Thornburg claims to have cremated her body, meaning it will never be found. To make matters worse, Tanya Begay's case remains open. Although there is evidence of physical assault from Thornburg, him being the last person to have been seen with Tanya, and the fact that he confessed to her murder, authorities have not done anything to further Tanya's case, and Thornburg has not been charged for it. This is a part of the reason that Tanya's case is being used as an example of racism and deliberate inaction by authorities towards the Native American nations in the US. Thornburg's victims all seem to have been victims of convenience at first glance. However, when you look deeper, you realize that he was preying on vulnerable people. Tanya Begay was easily targeted because she was already vulnerable to him. She had also been there to see his escalation of violence. From physical abuse, to using implements such as the coffee pot to abuse her, to being lured on a road trip, being murdered and cremated somewhere along the road where she could not rely on friends, family, or neighbors to assist her. Mark Jules' vulnerability was his willingness to open his home, to trust Thornburg. He was found in his bed, meaning he was probably asleep when Thornburg slit his throat, and then enacted a plan to destroy the home and evidence while he was away. The final 3 victims were all confirmed to have suffered from addiction, poverty, and housing difficulties. Thornburg used his and their religious views, as well as their circumstances, to lure them into a sense of safety and trust inside his den, where he then struck and went through great lengths to disguise his actions. After lighting the dumpster on fire, Thornburg washed the plastic storage containers and then returned them to the Home Depot where he had bought them from, and even received a refund for them. Had the bodies burned more before the dumpster fire was extinguished, I believe Thornburg would have taken more victims. When you look at the period between Tanya and Mark's death, it is obvious that Thornburg resisted his urges to commit murder due to the fact that he was under the scrutiny of authorities. As soon as he felt it was safe to do so again, he committed another murder. When he got away with this one quite easily, he felt empowered to commit several in a small period of time. I believe But his actions were cold and calculated, and the fact that he targeted people suffering from addiction like his mother did is not a coincidence. But of course, I'm not a forensic psychologist, so this is all just speculation based on my research into crimes so far. If there are any updates about this case in the future, I'll be sure to let you know in future episodes and on my social media. But for now, we have reached the end of episode 8, The Serial Crimes of Jason Alan Thornburg. Tanya Begay, Mark Jewell, David Lueras, Mary Cruz Matters, and Lauren Phillips. May you all rest gently now, away from the evils and struggles of this world. As for you listeners, I would love to hear your thoughts on the case. Do you think Thornburg really heard voices? Or do you think he simply tried to get away with his cold-blooded killings? Find me on social media and let me know. Until next time, be safe, wicked listeners.